By the end of 1953, most of these attacks had run their course. American people, thoroughly bewildered at widespread charges of 20 years of treason and subversion, had rejected the Democrats and put in the White House the Republican Party's traditional favorite, a war hero, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And it's interesting, too, as I say, how Dwight D. Eisenhower was taking advice from advisors from the very same group. And also they brought on board, already and had brought on board, all of the same characters that were into culture creation. They're taking on Bernays and all of those people too. Because after all, if you want to take over a world, you have to mold the minds of your victims so that they'll comply quite happily without knowing where they're going, but thinking that they do. It's very important you think you do. We'll be back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt for Cutting to the Matrix. Just digging up some of the past, which still exists in the present. In fact, more so than ever, it's much, much larger. And it's spread across pretty well every country on the planet. An organization that's worked with religious zeal, definitely a religious zeal, to bring in a type of world system. But let's not forget that behind it all, it was started by people who were into Darwinism. They were into superior and inferior types of people. They've used anthropology down through the years, still do lead the fields of that, some of their top universities, which they run, since they set the curriculums. And they have an ideal society to come out in the future. They're the ones who also came up with the global warming idea too. Man needs an enemy for a global society. If there's no more countries to point to and say, look, we're better than they are, that's how it works. Then you have to find an enemy within, and of course the enemy is man himself, according to the Club of Rome, one of the foundations that's just a part of this interlocking foundation network that Mr. Quigley talks about here. Our minds are entirely controlled and have been since we were born, because I say they set up the educational systems. They decided what you'd be taught, what spins you'd have, which would make sure that for the rest of your life you'd always go back to that teaching to try to draw reasonable conclusions. Well, if it's a warped theory to begin with, your reasoning will always be warped. Remember, as I say, that Cecil Rhodes said they'd set up, they basically copied the Jesuitical system. The Jesuits were famous for setting up front groups and having intrigue. Intrigue also meant having wars, so that the combatants would go at it together, never realizing there was another element behind it that would stay safe and out of sight and never take the blame for it. That's been their technique down through the years. I have many of their books printed by the CFR and the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and the minutes of their meetings. I scoured old bookstores, getting hold of some of them that obviously had been owned by previous members, and they had everyone in it, the tops of all the labor unions, all the top journalists across the planet, the editors, attending world meetings, discussing wars like World War II before it even happened, even mentioning the fact that Japan would come in, and that would bring America into it. In 1938, they wrote that one. They were absolutely certain of a post-war world that they would set up. In fact, the war didn't even faze them, this coming war. They didn't even consider they might lose, because they were on both sides of everything. They'd even been involved with Adolf Hitler. Many of the big members and bankers had set up IG Farben, that they gave Adolf Hitler his war machine. Look at the book, Trials of IG Farben. The Trials and Punishment, I think it's called, of IG Farben. And look at the amount of lawyers sent over to the Nuremberg trials to try and cover the coattails of IG Farben and get them out of it squeaky clean, at least as much as possible. Same CFR members too, and Rockefeller boys, etc. Thanks for listening. It's good night from Hamish and myself from Canada. So may your gods go with you.